The smell of melted plastic wafted from under the table, where a box of unwanted items lay. Old wires, a remote control without batteries, phones that no one had turned on in years. Anna sorted through them without much interest. She just needed to make room for the router. In one of the boxes, she found a small silver cell phone from the early 2000s, with a worn keyboard and a yellowed cover. When she picked it up, the screen flashed briefly, as if the device had come to life for a moment, even though it couldn't have had any charge left in it. She pressed the power button. The phone beeped and displayed an animated splash screen, after which the message, "SIM card activated," appeared on the screen. There was indeed an old card in the slot, thin, with the logo of an operator that had long since changed its name. Curiosity overcame caution. She left the phone on and put it on the shelf. Anna lived alone after her divorce. She worked from home, doing small design jobs, and received occasional calls from her daughter, who was studying in another city. She liked the quiet, the predictability. The incident with the phone seemed like a funny coincidence, nothing more. But a few minutes later, the device vibrated and a number appeared on the screen. The same one that was saved in the settings as her own. The phone was calling itself. She froze. At first, she thought it was a network error, but the signal repeated, long and calm, as if someone was really waiting for an answer. She pressed the answer button. There was a hissing sound in the speaker, as if the line were old and analog. Then a woman's voice, tired, even, without intonation, said, "Don't leave the house today." Anna thought someone was joking, but the voice continued, a little quieter. "If you go out, you won't live to see the morning." She turned off her phone, sat for a few seconds, and laughed. Shortly, tensely. She decided it was probably a recording from some viral video or a hidden feature. But a minute later, she heard a rumble from the street, the sound of brakes, and a crash. She looked out the window. Right in front of her building, two cars had collided, one throwing the other onto the sidewalk, in the spot where she usually walked in the morning. In the evening, she still felt uneasy. The old device was lying in a drawer, but the thought of the voice wouldn't leave her. Anna took out her phone and checked her call log. The incoming call from her own number had indeed been recorded. The time was right before the accident. She turned on the TV to drown out the silence, but in the reflection of the screen, she saw her phone light up again. Same number. She didn't answer the phone, just listened as the call repeated itself, then fell silent. After that, a message appeared. You didn't listen. And the date was one day ahead. She turned off the TV, feeling a chill run down her spine. In the morning, everything seemed normal. At the store, the cashier said that the communication line at the neighboring house had burned out during the night, a short circuit. Anna mechanically looked at her phone. It was turned off, but the screen was slightly warm, as if it had been working recently. She decided to throw it away. She walked to the trash cans, threw it in the bin, and returned home. But when she opened the front door, the phone was lying on the doormat. The screen was blank, except for a notification in the corner. Missed call. She tried to get rid of it again. She put it in the closet and took out the battery. But at night, a quiet buzzing sound came from the closet, as if the device had turned on again. At first, she tried to explain it all rationally. The network was glitching, the battery wasn't dead, and the phone's memory was confused. But when she received a notification from an unknown number and a time that hadn't happened yet, her doubts disappeared. The message consisted of 3 words: "Don't look up." She automatically looked up. The ceiling light flickered, and for a moment, it seemed to her that the glass was reflecting not her room, but another one. The same, but with an empty chair and a phone on the floor. That evening, Anna called her daughter. She just wanted to hear her voice, to make sure everything was okay. The girl answered cheerfully, said that everything was fine, that she might come over for the weekend. Anna didn't mention the phone, but after the call, she noticed that a new contact had appeared on the old device, with her daughter's name and a time that coincided with her visit. She tried to delete the entry, but the system responded with "access restricted." The next day, the mailman brought an envelope with no return address. Inside was a receipt for communication services. Exactly 1 month's worth, dated 10 years ago. At the bottom was a signature, her own. She realized that the phone she was holding belonged to her. It was from a time when her life was different. Her husband, her school-age daughter, morning calls from this number. She remembered how she had lost that phone. It seemed she had simply forgotten it in a cafe. At the time, she didn't think much of it and got a new number. But now the phone was back, and the voice spoke to her in the same tone she had once used to persuade her daughter not to go out alone in the dark. Closer to midnight, the phone rang again, from the same number. Anna didn't want to answer, but her fingers pressed the green button on their own. The voice was the same, only quieter and slightly trembling. He said that time was almost up, and that now everything depended on her. She asked who it was, but the answer sounded muffled, as if coming from underwater. "It's you." The call ended, but for a second, a humming sound, like breathing, could still be heard from the speaker. She didn't sleep until morning. When dawn broke, she tried to check everything logically. She found the operator's website, entered the number, and the system replied that it had been deactivated 10 years ago. She went to the communications office and showed them the phone. The operator was surprised and said that such models did not work with current SIM cards. She checked it and turned pale. The list of recent calls included an outgoing call to a landline number, to the old address where Anna once lived with her family. The operator suggested deactivating the card, but the system would not allow it. A message appeared on the screen. "The number is active. The subscriber is talking." Anna snatched the phone from the girl's hands and ran out into the street. She understood that if this number was still talking, it meant that the line had not been disconnected, and that there was someone on the other end too. At home, the phone was where she had left it, on the windowsill. The screen was flashing, as if waiting. She picked it up, and the display lit up with the phrase, "You turned the wrong way." Then the memory card displayed old photos. Her daughter, her husband, the New Year's table, the yard. In the last picture, it was her, sitting in a chair by the window with the phone in her hand. Only the chair in the photo was different. an old one from her previous apartment. Anna enlarged the image and noticed a detail, a reflection in the window. It showed the same street, but covered with snow, even though it was autumn now, and a car with a dented hood, exactly like the one that had recently crashed into her building. In the evening, the phone rang again. She didn't answer, but it kept ringing. When the screen went blank, a new message appeared. Don't go. A minute later, her home phone rang. The call came from the same old number. She didn't pick up the phone, just listened as the ringing grew longer, then faded away. Then silence. She went to the window and saw a street light blinking across the street, while all the others were burning steadily. It blinked once, then twice, as if giving a signal. The phone came back to life. Now it showed not a number, but the word error. The screen flashed, and a quiet wheeze sounded from the speaker, in which she could make out her name. She sat down, feeling her heart beating in her temples. The phone said, "If you don't believe it, it will happen again." And then it fell silent. Anna thought the voice sounded older than before, and too familiar. Since morning, the apartment had felt strange. The kitchen smelled of dust and plastic, as if a fuse had blown, even though the appliances were turned off. An old cell phone lay on the table, its screen dark, but there was a faint crackling sound coming from inside the case, as if something was moving around inside. Anna didn't touch it. She just walked between rooms, trying to remember where she might have left the spare keys, not because she was going out, but because she was now afraid of the door. By evening, her anxiety had turned into a stubborn desire to explain everything. She pulled old boxes of documents out of the closet and found receipts from 10 years ago and old printouts of bills. Several of them had the same number that had called her yesterday. Opposite it was her husband's signature. He had registered the card in his name when they still had a joint contract for communications. Anna remembered how, after the divorce, they divided their property and even their phone bills. He said he would pay for everything himself, as long as she didn't touch his archives. That same year, he died in an accident. It was a coincidence. He drove into oncoming traffic. She did not attend the funeral. She was living in another city at the time. She put the papers on the table. One of them was a payment slip with his handwriting and a date that matched the one shown on the phone when the first warning sounded. She sat for a long time, listening to the rain drizzling outside the window. When the drops fell silent, the apartment was suddenly filled with a faint sound, long and intermittent, as if an old modem was connecting to the network. The phone, lying under the papers, turned on by itself. The data transfer icon flashed on the screen. She picked it up. The display was white, but lines began to appear on it. Old incoming messages from 10 years ago. They appeared one after another. Short reminders, everyday notes, congratulations. And the last one, don't go out tonight. The message was sent from her current number. Anna felt her fingers tremble. Everything was falling into some kind of absurd chain. The past and present were switching places, as if someone were rewriting history. She turned off her phone, but a second later the screen lit up again and displayed a new notification. Voice message received. She turned it on. A few seconds of silence, then a rustle, and her own voice came through the speaker. The same tone she used when she was holding back her irritation. "If you leave, it will all start over again." She threw the phone away. It fell screen down, but a faint sound continued to come from the speaker, like footsteps on wet asphalt. During the night, she was awakened by the doorbell. It was quiet and brief. She approached and looked through the peephole, but there was no one there. A paper note, folded in half, was lying on the doormat. Inside was a phone number and the signature, "Communication Service." The number matched her old one. She called in the morning from her work cell phone. Someone answered quickly on the other end. A male voice said that the request had been recorded and that a return call had already been confirmed. Anna didn't understand what he was talking about, but the voice repeated, "You don't need to do anything. The line is already closed." After that, the phone call was disconnected. In the afternoon, she went to the old neighborhood where she used to live with her husband. The house was still there, but now there was a store downstairs. The entrance had been repainted, and the doors were new. She stood at the window of her former apartment. Now a family lived there, and she could hear a children's show on the TV. An elderly neighbor recognized her. She said she still remembered the accident. Her husband had left at night because someone had called him, saying he urgently needed to take some documents to his wife. Only later did she say that she hadn't made any call. Anna felt everything inside her tighten. The voice on the phone, the warning, "Don't go out." It all repeated itself, only in reverse order. Then he left. Now she stayed. She asked her neighbor if she remembered what date it was that night. The woman thought for a moment and said it was around the end of October. Today was the 29th. In the evening, the phone came to life again. The words, "The time has come," appeared on the screen. The voice, now very similar to hers, spoke slowly, as if from afar. "You didn't have time to call then? Now it's me." She felt the air in the room become thicker. The lights flickered, the TV turned on by itself, and displayed a settings screen with numbers showing the date and time. The time coincided with the minute when that very call began. Anna went to the window. There was a car outside with its headlights on. The driver was nowhere to be seen. The headlights were shining directly on her window. Her phone vibrated, the screen flashing, each flash reflected in the glass. She finally made up her mind. She went to the outlet, pulled out the power cord, and turned off all the electricity in the apartment. Only the old phone continued to glow, as if powered by air. The words, "Now you're connected," appeared on the screen. She took the piece of paper with the number and wrote her signature next to it. Her fingers were trembling. When she put down the pen, the phone screen showed the same movement. The letters appeared in real time, repeating her gesture. She told herself it was just an illusion, a reflection, a coincidence. But she knew that explanation wouldn't help. The phone made a quiet sound, like a notification alert. A new message appeared. "Tomorrow at noon, don't be late." She tried to turn it off, but the screen didn't go dark. So she hid the phone in a drawer, locked it, and sat down on the floor. Outside, the street light that had been flickering earlier came back on. Now the light burned steadily. Anna thought that maybe it was all over. But at 2 o'clock in the morning, the landline phone rang in the apartment, the one that hadn't worked for several years. The call was short. She picked up the receiver. A woman's voice said quietly into the speaker, "Now it's my turn to warn you." She froze, pressing the receiver to her ear. The voice sounded tired, but confident, like her own, only a little older. "If you go out tomorrow, it will happen again." She stayed awake until dawn, staring at the glowing screen of her old phone until the numbers started counting down. And for the first time, she thought, maybe the calls aren't coming from the future. Maybe they're just from that day that hasn't ended yet. By morning, she felt as if she were trapped in a vicious circle. Events weren't unfolding. They were repeating themselves. The phone was silent, but the feeling that someone was listening did not go away. Every step she took seemed to echo. The creak of the parquet floor repeated itself with a delay. A drop from the tap fell into the sink twice, as if time had become a reflection of itself. She decided to wait until noon. The message said 12. A thought flashed through her mind. If this is a loop, maybe this is when it all started. She put the old phone on the table and turned on the voice recorder on the new one. The house was quiet. The second hand moved slowly, as if through viscous air. When the clock struck 12, the old phone turned on by itself. The screen flashed, and her name appeared on it. Not a number, her name. Then, the sound of breathing and the phrase, "Now listen carefully." It was her voice, but without emotion. It said that it all started on the day she didn't answer. That the call came 10 years ago, but the network didn't manage to transmit the signal. That the line remained open. Anna tried to understand what "the line is open" meant, but the voice continued, "You didn't believe it then, just as you don't believe it now. That's why everything is repeating itself." She felt a chill in her chest. It seemed to her that the air had become thick, as if the walls were absorbing every word. The text slowly appeared on the screen. "Look out the window." She turned her head and saw herself. On the opposite side of the street stood a woman in a gray coat, her own figure, only older. She was looking straight at her and holding a phone to her ear. Anna recoiled, bumped into the table, and the old cell phone fell, but continued to work. The voice in the speaker said, "You think you can leave, but you're already out." She walked over to the mirror in the hallway. Her reflection was shaky, as if there were water on the glass. It seemed to her that the reflection was moving with a delay. When she lowered her hand, the reflection in the mirror was still holding the phone to her ear. A notification sound came from the bedroom. A letter, with no sender's address, appeared on the laptop screen. The subject line was her name. The body of the letter consisted of a short phrase, "You didn't save me, so now you're warning me." She opened her old photo archives. In one of the folders was a series of photos from the date of the accident. The photos showed their old car, a rainy road, wet glass. The last photo showed her husband getting behind the wheel, a phone in his hand, Its screen lit up with an incoming call. The number was hers. She remembered everything. He was supposed to come to her that evening. They were no longer living together, but he called and asked her to return his documents. She didn't answer. Her phone ran out of battery, so she put it on charge and went to bed. In the morning, she found out that he had died. Now everything fell into place. The line that remained open, the calls, the warnings. The only thing that was unclear was who was saving whom, she him or he her. The phone beeped. The words, "Role reversal complete," appeared on the screen. She pressed the call button without thinking. The answer came instantly. It was a man's voice, muted, echoing as if from a tunnel. He said that everything was fine now, that the connection was established in both directions. She asked who it was and heard, "You remember I called then too." The voice stopped, but the screen was still flashing. Then a new line slowly lit up. "Now your number is outgoing." The day passed with a strange clarity. All sounds became sharper, colors colder. She felt that every action had repercussions somewhere else. In the evening, she turned on the radio, and a short signal sounded on the air, exactly like the one on the old telephone. The announcer talked about communication interruptions, about old lines that suddenly began to transmit data with a 10-year delay. "It's as if they are bringing back forgotten conversations," he said. Anna turned off the radio. The phone was lying in front of her, and she knew it would ring again soon. A message slowly appeared on the display. "Last call." She dialed her own number. A second later, the speaker came to life. The voice on the other end said, "I've already heard that." She realized she was talking to herself, to her past self, 10 years ago. She asked who was calling, and Anna replied, "Don't leave the house." There was a frightened gasp on the line, then a short dial tone. She sat holding the phone and felt a strange calm. Everything had finally come full circle. She was both the voice that warned and the woman who didn't believe. The screen went blank. A week later, her neighbor knocked on her door. The apartment was locked, but there was a quiet hum coming from behind the door, as if an old cell phone was working somewhere under the floor. Rescuers broke down the door but found no one inside. A phone with an open screen was lying on the table. It displayed the message, "Connection stable." Since then, residents of the building have sometimes complained that their landline phones receive short calls with no sound. When you answer, you hear only faint breathing and a woman's voice quietly saying, "Don't go out." The number from which these calls originate has long since ceased to exist, but the line is still open. After that morning when the screen showed "Connection stable," Anna's life seemed to be in limbo. Days passed, but nothing changed. There were no calls, but the phone always remained warm, as if it never rested for a minute. Sometimes it seemed to her that even if she removed the battery, it would still work, like a heart that no longer belongs to the body. She stopped opening the windows. In the evening, the city was noisy, but the sound passed through the glass as if from another reality. Her own footsteps in the apartment did not echo immediately. The echo caught up with a delay. Once she noticed that the clock on the wall was running a few minutes fast. then slow, then fast again, but only at the moments when the phone screen flashed imperceptibly. Anna began to record the time, not the dates, but the seconds when the strange flashes occurred, to find a pattern. Within a week, she had figured out a regular pattern. Every day, at the same time, at exactly 10:32:38, the screen lit up for a fraction of a second, as if receiving a signal. She realized that this was the same minute when the accident had happened, 10 years ago, according to the police report. She took an old tape recorder out of the drawer. She wanted to record how that moment sounded. That evening she sat in the dark, propping her chin on her hand, listening to the wind rustling outside the window. When the clock hands reached the right time, the phone beeped briefly. A short signal, like a pulse, sounded from the speaker. She turned on the recording. At first, there was nothing, just a slight background noise like from an old radio. Then a quiet breath, and a woman's voice came from the tape recorder's speaker. Her own voice, but faint, as if from far away. "You're still here." Anna recoiled, dropped the recorder, and the recording stopped. The phone on the table went blank, but one line remained on the screen. Answer accepted. The next morning, she went to the communications center again. This time, she insisted on speaking to an engineer. A man in his 50s, with a tired face and glasses on a cord, listened to her story without surprise, as if he had heard something like this before. He said that the company sometimes records echoes of old lines, data that gets stuck in network nodes and is accidentally reproduced years later. Anna asked if this could explain the call from the same number and the voice that sounded like hers. The engineer sighed and said that, theoretically, the network could indeed store fragments of sound if they were not properly terminated. Sometimes people hear old conversations, or what's left between them. He suggested looking at the signal map, but when he connected his laptop to the device, the screen displayed an error. Access restricted. Connection active. The man frowned. He tried restarting the program. Then the screen displayed, "A call from this number is already in progress." He took off his glasses, looked at her, and asked if she had called anyone just now. Anna shook her head. Then he turned on the external speaker, and a faint, crackling sound came from the speakers, followed by a voice. It was a woman's voice, even, tired. She said one word, "Careful." The engineer turned pale. He said it couldn't be a live broadcast. They didn't have any active lines. He wrote the number down on a piece of paper and asked Anna not to use the device, promising to hand it over to the company archives himself. She handed him the phone, feeling as if an invisible weight had been lifted from her shoulders. It became quieter at home. She even slept peacefully for several days. But in the middle of the week, the same engineer called her. His voice was strange, muffled, with interference. He said he wanted to return the device to her. When she asked why, he replied that the system had requested the owner's identification, and without it, they couldn't close the connection. He asked her to come in person because the phone was active again and contacting her on its own. Anna arrived. The office smelled of dust and ozone. Her old phone was lying on the table, connected to the equipment. The screen was lit up, even though the power cord was not plugged in. The contacts slowly scrolled across the display, and then a new name appeared. Igor, her husband's name. Next to it was an envelope symbol, as if he had just sent a message. The engineer tried to stop the process, but the screen flashed, and the device displayed the text. Connection transferred. Then a new message flashed. Reception complete. Line open. At that moment, a muffled ringing sound came from the phone's speaker, as if from underwater. The man tried to turn off the power, but the display did not respond. Then he held the phone to his ear, and after a second, turned pale, recoiled, and threw the device on the table. Anna asked what he had heard. He replied that someone had whispered her name and said, "She can hear." The phone went blank, then lit up again. On the screen was a photo. The accident itself. Blurred lights, wet asphalt. In the background was a woman standing on the sidewalk with a phone in her hand. She recognized herself. That evening, for the first time, she felt that the past wasn't just remembering her. It was waiting for her, as if someone was still on the line, still trying to call her. She took out a notebook and wrote down everything that happened each day. At the bottom of the page, she made a note. If the cycle repeats, find the moment it began. Leafing through her notes, she noticed that all the events began on the same day of the month, the 29th, and each time with the same phrase, "Don't go out." Anna realized that tomorrow was the 29th again. The night before had been restless. Everything in the apartment was humming. The refrigerator, the wiring, even the clock was making a strange, low tone. She lay down, but couldn't fall asleep. At midnight, there was a quiet ringing. Not a telephone ringing. It sounded like glass ringing. She got up and went to the window. Her old phone was lying on the windowsill, even though she was sure she had left it at the communication center. It glowed from within, but the screen was blank. Anna picked it up, and the words, "If you want to end it, call yourself," appeared on the glass. She knew she shouldn't, but her fingers dialed the numbers on their own. The dial tone was long. Then from the speaker came breathing, and her own voice, slightly younger, said, "You did everything right. Now just wait." The line went dead. At dawn, she went out into the yard, for the first time in a long time. The air was cold and damp. Cars were parked along the curb. People were walking by. Everything looked normal until she noticed that the light by the entrance was flickering, just like that day. There was a dark spot on the asphalt, like an oil stain. She came closer and saw her reflection in it. Only the reflection was standing differently than she was. It was holding a phone to its ear. At that moment, the phone in her hand vibrated. The screen showed an incoming call from her own number. She dropped the device, but the ringing did not stop. It seemed as if the sound was coming directly from the air. Then everything fell silent. She returned home, lay down on the bed, and stared at the ceiling for a long time. It seemed as if the house was now breathing with her, sometimes slowing down, sometimes speeding up. The screen of her phone flashed on the bedside table, showing the time. The hands stopped at one mark, 22:38. A quiet click came from the speaker. Then a voice again, tired but calm. "You made the right choice. But now, don't sleep." Anna closed her eyes, and somewhere far beyond the wall, another phone rang. Not hers, not her neighbor's. Just a call with nowhere to go. The next morning, the apartment greeted her with a hollow silence. The light was strangely diffused, as if the air had become denser, more viscous, like water in an aquarium. Everything around her looked slightly out of scale. The corners were softer, the reflections deeper than they should be. Anna went to the window and noticed that the glass showed not today's courtyard, but the old one. The one where their old car still stood and the children's tree grew, which had long since been cut down. In the reflection, she saw a person in a coat stepping toward the door. She turned around sharply. No one was there. Only the air smelled of gasoline and wet asphalt. The phone was lying on the windowsill. The screen was off, but in the reflection of the window she could see that it was lit up. And her name was displayed on it. Below it was a date, 10 years ago. Then the screen went dark again. She remembered the engineer's words, "The line is open," and realized that perhaps it wasn't just about communication. That the connection might not be between phones, but between moments, and that one of them was not meant to be preserved. She took a sheet of paper and drew a diagram. The date of the accident, the first call, the warning, the repeating minute. Everything matched, except for one thing: the last call. The one that came from the void. Anna wrote down the question: "Who is calling, if it's both of us?" The phone vibrated briefly. The screen lit up and slowly displayed the answer. The one who stayed on the line. She remembered that after her husband's death, strangers had called her. Short beeps, silence. At the time, she thought it was a mistake. Now she understood. Maybe he was trying to call her then too, to say the same thing. And if the connection was now established, it meant that one of them had to let go. In the evening, it was 22:38 again. The phone on the nightstand lit up with a soft light. Anna sat down opposite it, without touching it. An old photo appeared on the screen. Her and her husband, taken on that very old model of phone. They were smiling, but her husband's eyes reflected something like anxiety. He was not looking at the camera, but slightly to the side, as if he could already hear that very call. The screen flickered. A faint sound of rain came from the speaker. Then a voice, a man's, hoarse, recognizable, but slightly distorted, as if from an old recording. He said he had been calling for too long, that she hadn't answered, and that now it was her turn. Anna tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come, so she typed a text message. "I'm here." The phone obediently typed the words itself, even though she hadn't moved her fingers. Then the screen displayed, "Me too." She asked herself what she should do to end it all. The answer came immediately. Hang up. She realized that it wasn't about the connection, that it wasn't just a telephone signal, but something like a looped memory, where the past continues to ring until someone answers. She took a screwdriver, removed the back cover, and took out the battery. The screen did not go dark. On the contrary, it became brighter. The light was white even, without flickering. The voice said, "If you don't answer, you'll stay." She went to the kitchen and found an old box with wires where she had once kept this phone. At the bottom was an old SIM card, broken like a broken tooth. On the day she lost the phone, she thought the card was simply missing. Now she understood. She had left it in her husband's car, and after the accident, someone had inserted it into a new case. The circle was complete. She placed the card next to the phone. A notification appeared on the screen. "Device found." Then silence. Anna turned on the voice recorder. She wanted to record the last few seconds. Time dragged on. The air seemed to stand still. Then a short beep sounded from the phone's speaker, the old call signal, followed by her own voice, the one that had warned her for 10 years in a row. "Don't go out," she replied quietly. "Now I can." The screen flashed, showing today's date for a split second, and then went blank. The room became completely silent, with no background noise or humming. The clock stopped. A day later, an ambulance arrived at the house. The neighbor downstairs had called the doctors, saying that there had been no footsteps or lights upstairs for 3 days. The door was opened. Anna was lying on the sofa, as if asleep, her face calm. On the table was an old phone, turned off, the battery removed. On a piece of paper nearby was a short note. "Line closed." One of the paramedics noticed that the phone screen suddenly lit up. A notification appeared on it. "Call completed. Connection terminated." He pressed the button, but the device went blank. Several months passed. A young couple bought the apartment. During renovations, they found a wire in the wall between the rooms. Thin, old, as if from a telephone. On one side, it was broken, and on the other, it went inside the ceiling. An electrician said that such lines had not been used for a long time. On their first night in the new apartment, the landline phone, which they had not yet connected, rang. A woman's voice said quietly, "Are you at the new number?" And without waiting for an answer added, "Then everything is fine." And since then, the house has had a little peculiarity. Every year on the same day, October 29th, all the phones in the vicinity lose their signal for exactly 1 minute. And if you put your ear to the speaker at that moment, you can hear breathing, a faint whisper, and words spoken without threat, just tiredly, almost humanly. The connection is complete. Thank you for answering.